Alright folks, welcome back to Callahan's Garage. My name's Callahan and today we are back on our 62 Beetle project. So in the previous videos we got the rear end apart, we got our rear suspension taken apart. I showed you how to notch and adjust your rear spring plates if you're going to use your original ones. But today we've got our transaxle back into the car and we're going to install our new adjustable spring plates. Alright, so like we said, we got our transaxle fully installed in the car. We're ready to get our rear end totally back together. So we've got brand new adjustable spring plates. We've got brand new hardware for everything. We've got our torsion caps cleaned up and painted. Our bushings are still good. We're going to be able to reuse those. So we're ready to put all of this into the car. And all of our suspension for this project is provided by AutoWorks Suspension. And as far as I'm concerned, they are absolutely the best source for all of your air-cooled suspension needs. Sam is as good as gold. All of these parts he builds from scratch out of brand new material at a reasonable price point, and you're buying parts from a true Volkswagen enthusiast and supporting a small business. So I will link Sam's website in the description. And like I said, if you ever need any air-cooled suspension parts, whether it's a narrowed beam, air ride beam, off-road beams, type 1, 2, 3, he is the one-stop shop for all of it. So in this particular project, we're going with an adjustable spring plate, and this just makes setting up your rear end super easy, super convenient, very easy and quick to make adjustments as you need to. So as you can see, your adjustable spring plates are going to be made up of two components. So we have our end here that goes on the end of the torsion housing, and then we have our spring plate that goes back to your axle, and these operate independently from each other. And then we have our adjuster screw that allows us to refine this height. So we're still going to set these up on our torsion spring at a particular angle where we want them, and then we'll really be able to fine tune the ride height and everything with our adjustment screw here. So let's go put them on the car. Okay, so we already have everything completely disassembled back here. We're ready to start putting it back together. If you need a video for how to disassemble all of this, I have a video for that already. So our new adjustable spring plates are going to install just like original style spring plates. We don't have to do anything differently. So we're going to install these already lowered one outer spline, and then we'll be able to adjust this and lower it just a little bit more using our adjustment here. So there's two schools of thought here. We could either lower this more than we want and then use our adjustment to raise it back up, or we could install a little bit higher and then use our adjustment to lower it. So that's what we're going to do. I've done it both ways, and I haven't found one way to really be any better than the other or really any noticeable difference. So either way, in my experience, it doesn't seem to particularly matter. So we're ready to install our new adjustable spring plate onto our torsion spring here. So you can see I've got a bungee cord around my axle, and that's just pulling my axle, my brake back out of the way. And what that's going to do is that's going to give me the space I need to be able to freely move this spring plate while we're setting it at the angle that we want. So like we said, we're going to install this lowered one outer spline. And just from doing this 100 times, I know that one spline is going to put me with just a touch of preload above my step down here. So I'm just going to find that notch where I want this to land, and then I can push this on. And like we said, we just need that little bit of preload so I can lift up on my spring plate, set it up under the notch, and now we can tap the end of our spring plate all the way onto our torsion, put our bushing and our cap on here. So we are fully seated on there now. So now we're ready to install our bushings, and my bushings are still good, so I've just cleaned them up a little bit, and I've put just a light smear of grease on the inside of my bushing just to help keep these from squeaking when we put it all together. So we can put our bushing into place. So now we can put our cap on, and the kit comes with a spacer for our cap. This goes behind the cap to accommodate the thickness of both of our plates here now. So we're just going to set these in place. And then Sam also provides brand new hardware for your caps that are long enough to accommodate the spacer as well. And a lot of times these caps can be kind of tricky to get back on here, so you may have to kind of pry on them and get it back into place with your bushing. Keep in mind when you're doing something like this is you want to get all of your bolts started in place before you tighten any one of them down all the way. Because like I said, these can be really tricky to get totally lined up perfectly. So get all of your bolts started, and then you can run this thing all the way down tight. Okay, so now our spring plate is fully installed. You can see there's really not a lot to it when we already have it disassembled and we've got nice, clean, new stuff. So now we can take our axle loose from our bungee cord, swing it back into place, and we got brand new hardware to bolt our spring plate up to our axle. Okay, so now we have our spring plates and our axles bolted back together. And one more thing I want to mention is we can see these spring plates are also already notched, like we mentioned in the previous video, so that we get additional suspension travel when the car is lowered. But also, if you look closely, you can see that the bolt holes here for our axle are slotted a little bit more than factory, and that's going to allow us to slide this axle forward and backwards to correct the toe alignment on the rear end of our car. And also, these spring plates are extended slightly, so when you lower these cars a fair bit, what ends up happening, just because of the geometry of the suspension, is our rear end ends up toeing in slightly, so the front of the wheel will pull in, and it will cause the car to handle really weird sometimes, especially in wet conditions. So these slotted bolt holes and the extended length of our spring plates help to correct that, so you can really get your rear alignment dialed in where it needs to be. Okay, so now we have our spring plates fully reinstalled on the car. Next, I've got some lowered shocks I'm going to install on here. I'm going to hook my parking brake cable back up, torque my drums down, then we can put our wheels and tires on here and set the car down. Okay, so we got our wheels and tires on, and there's a couple more things I want to point out before we set this on the ground. So I'm running a 185/65, and as you can see, this is a totally stock wheel. It's not wide or anything like that. This is my preferred tire size on a reasonably low car with stock wheels. The only real issue you may run into with the adjustable spring plates is the inside sidewall may rub on the adjuster on the spring plate. So that's just something to keep in mind. I also have a 1-inch wheel spacer on here right now, just because this car has short axles and it's going to be lowered, and a lot of times you could run into issues with the tire rubbing on the inner fender. So that wheel spacer just eliminates that. So if you have an early car with short axles, these are just things you want to keep in mind. The back spacing of the wheel, the width of your wheel, and the width of the tire that you're going to run. Currently, I've got just over an inch in between my sidewall and the adjuster on the spring plate. So even without the wheel spacer, this would still work. But if I ran a 195 or even a slightly wider tire, it would probably rub on that adjuster. Okay, so we've got the car set down on the blocks. I don't have the front end together yet, so we're not going to be able to set it all the way down on the ground, but you can get a pretty good idea of where it's going to sit. But before we start fine-tuning our adjustment, we need to settle the suspension in a little bit. So especially with these swing axle cars, anytime you jack the car up and then set it back down, it's not going to settle all the way down until we either move the car around or bounce it around and get the suspension to cycle and sit all the way down. So you can bounce on the bumper, you can push on the fenders. Like I said, the easiest way to do it is just roll the car back and forth a couple times and it will naturally settle in. But since the car's not on the ground, I'm going to bounce around on this thing for a second and see if we can't get it to settle all the way in. Okay, so it looks like we got the car to settle in just a little bit more, and this is about where the car would normally sit when it's lowered one outer spline on your factory spring plates. And currently, we're sitting right about 3.5 inches from our fender arch down to the top of our wheel. And luckily, this car is pretty much dead even from side to side. But a lot of times the driver's side will be a little worn out and it'll sag slightly lower than the passenger side. So that's where having these adjustable spring plates really comes in handy, because we can really fine tune that adjustment from side to side and get it sitting perfectly even. So now we're going to jack the car up just a little bit. I'm going to show you how to make the adjustments on these spring plates, and then we're going to adjust it all the way down and see where this thing lands at. So as you can see, we don't even have to take our wheels and tires off to make adjustments on these. We just need to jack the car up slightly, take the weight off of this adjustment bolt. So we just have a jam nut, and then we have a bolt that runs in and out and controls our height. So this works basically exactly the same way as your front end adjusters if you have an adjustable beam. So you can just loosen this jam nut, and then now I'm going to run this bolt almost all the way down and see where our suspension lands at. And now we can just tighten this jam nut back up and our suspension height will be locked back in. There we go. All right, so now our spring plates are adjusted all the way down. So you can see we got a pretty big range of adjustment. And now we're sitting right about 1.25 inches from our fender arch to our wheel. So a little over 2 inches of adjustment just on our spring plates alone. So you can see, how much tunability you have with your ride height just from our adjustable spring plates. And I think we're going to end up raising it up just a little bit more. I just want a little bit of gap between my wheel and my fender arch. So once we get our front ends back together, get it sitting where we want it, we'll really be able to fine tune the height of the rear and get it exactly where we want it. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up on our adjustable spring plate installing. And as you can see, we made a drastic height difference on the rear end of our car. So next we've got a narrowed adjustable front end we're going to put in this thing. We've got drop spindles. We're going to get all the brakes bled out and working. So I'll have a step-by-step video for that as well. If you have any questions about the adjustable spring plates, leave them in the comments. And like I said, I will put the link to this exact setup in the description. So if you need one for yourself, make sure you hit up my boy Sam. But that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.